Hello and welcome to today's Partner Infopedia web conference. This is Dynamics 365 Fast Track Tech Talk, Security Modeling. Presenting with us today from Microsoft, we have Katie Haveles, who is a Senior Fast Track Program Manager. Now it's my pleasure to hand you over. Katie, you now have the floor.
Thank you, Debbie. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our Security Modeling Tech Talk. Today we're going to cover a broad range of security topics. So we'll start with some general security concepts. We'll transition into talking a bit about ownership and teams. We'll cover security roles and associated privileges, and then some other topics, including sharing of different records within the system, security hierarchies, as well as field-level security. And at the end, as Debbie mentioned, in addition to trying to address any questions that might come up as we're going through the presentation, we'll also try to leave some time for some open Q&A at the end. We're targeting for about 2 hours today, and the outcomes that we're expecting are a general understanding of Dynamics 365 security concepts and how to apply access control mechanisms to your various solutions and applications that are built on Dynamics 365. We're going to go ahead and get started, and as Debbie mentioned, if you have any questions, please feel free to pop those into the chat window, and we will try to address them at an appropriate time or at the end of the session. All right, so Dynamics 365 has a wide range of security modeling features, and it's important that you choose the most appropriate approach to implementing a particular solution. Each of these security features has a combination of characteristics, and they provide a balance between granularity of access control, administrative ease, as well as an impact on scalability of your given solution. Okay? It's important to have an understanding of the underlying mechanisms that support each of these security modeling features to ensure that you're using the appropriate approach for your given requirements and solution. Granting access to users can be broken out into two main areas. There's authentication, which is determining who the user is and confirming they are who they say they are, right? And then there's authorization, which determines what that authenticated user is entitled to access, what actions they're allowed to perform once they've been authenticated to the system, okay? So for Dynamics 365, authentication is handled via Azure Active Directory. Okay. We're not going to be covering that in detail today. We do have other sessions that go into a bit more detail on authentication. Today we'll be focusing on the authorization side of this. Okay. So after a user has been identified and authenticated to the system, that's when the authorization takes place, and we look at, okay, now that we've determined who this person or this user is, let's see what access and permissions that they have throughout the system. Okay? And this is a combination of security roles, of team memberships, and field level security or field level security profiles that's going to determine what they can then see and do within the system. So let's talk a little bit about our security components. So we have security principles, and these are the objects to which security access can be granted. Okay? And then we have the access control components, and these are the components that are used to grant access to the security principles. So security principles or system principles consist of system users and teams. System user represents a user of the system that has a distinct identity to access Dynamics 365. Okay? It can be a physical person or a logical identity, maybe it's a service account, and it has a defined business unit to which it's associated. Teams, on the other hand, don't have a logical identity that can be used to access Dynamics 365, okay? So they can't log into the system as a team. Okay? It's a logical entity within the system that's used to model common groupings for security modeling. So a team represents a group of users in the system. A team can contain 0 or more users as members, so there are scenarios where you might have teams that do not have any members associated. And there are 2 types of teams that can be created within the system. There are access teams and owner teams. And we'll get into those in a little bit more detail when we progress throughout the presentation here. Access teams can't own records. They don't have assigned security roles. Owner teams do have assigned security roles, and they can own records. Okay? We'll get into the details and pros and cons of each a little bit later in the presentation today. Moving on to some of the access control mechanisms that we have within the system. So there's ownership. So this defines access and privileges on records to which a security principal owns. Okay? There are defined security role privileges for the various entity types that are tied back to ownership within the system. We have business unit access, or BU access, which defines access and privileges to records within a business unit to which that security principal belongs. Okay, so if we have a given user, that user is assigned to a particular business unit, and you can scope access at the business unit level, which would grant access to records that are within the user's given business unit. Okay? And there's 2 types of business unit level access. There's local or immediate business unit, which means the business unit to which that security principal directly belongs. There's also what's called deep or parent-child business unit, which grants access to the immediate business unit of the security principal or user, and also any child business units of that business unit to which the security principal belongs. There's organization access, which grants access to all data of that particular type or record type within the organization. This is defined at the entity creation level. There's 2 types of entities that can be created when you're customizing the system or configuring. 2 types of ownership level. One is user or team, and the other is organization level, which is what this applies to. We also have what's called sharing within Dynamics 365, and this allows for granting explicit access to specific records within the system. And it also allows for granting various types of permissions. So when you go to share a record within the system with another user or team, you have the ability to define whether that user or team would be able to update the given record, delete it, or just view it, right? And we'll get into that in a bit more detail later in the presentation. Covering some access control components within the application. So we have privileges, okay? And the concept of a privilege is important within the application. They're used to define the entitlement to perform an action within the system, as well as the records against which that action can be performed. Okay? So, for example, there's privileges to create a given record type in the system. There's also broader privileges for things like the ability to export data from the system or import data. Okay? Privileges are granted through a security role, and they're also cumulative. Security roles are a collection of privileges that can be applied to groups of records within the system. Okay? And again, there's various scoping mechanisms, which we'll cover in a bit more detail, that include things like user level access, business unit, or organization level access. Security roles are assigned to users or owner teams within the system. Again, the permissions that a security role grants are cumulative. So if a user is assigned multiple security roles, their access within the system will be the culmination of all of those security roles. Business unit, again, as we mentioned earlier, is another control mechanism within the system and allows for scoping a given privilege or permission within the system. Business units are hierarchical in nature. As we mentioned earlier, you can have parent business units and child business units below the parent business units, multiple levels deep. Again, we have the organization scoping mechanism. And when you configure a new instance of Dynamics 365, there's a root organization that's established for that business unit, or I'm sorry, for that instance. And then this can be used as a scoping mechanism to indicate a particular security principal has organization-wide access for a particular privilege or permission within the system. Sharing roles, again, are a mechanism to grant access to specific records within the system. Okay. And sharing also takes into account security roles. So a user that would like to share a record needs the permission to be able to share that record. Okay. And the receiving user of the share also requires an appropriate security role in order to have that record shared with them. We have field-level security available within the system, and this allows you to restrict access to specific fields. So these would typically be a high business impact fields, might have PII data in them that you need to lock down and restrict. Field-level security can be tied to specific users or teams to grant access to those fields on which field-level security has been enabled. Hierarchy security allows for a person to inherit privileges from users that they manage or have a hierarchical relationship with. Hierarchy security can be based off of manager or position, and they're used to describe the structure to inherit permissions from the subordinates in the hierarchy. So a manager hierarchy type allows for access of all the direct reports for that manager within the system. Okay? And you can define this multiple levels deep, and it uses the recursive system user relationship that's on the user record to point to a specific manager for a given user. Okay? Position-based allows for defining a position hierarchy within the system, and the hierarchy security will leverage the position-based if you so choose. And you can only have one of those enabled at a given time. We'll cover hierarchical security in a little more detail toward the end of the presentation. So all of these components that we're going to discuss today can be used in combination to ensure that you're providing the appropriate security model for your application and leveraging the best component for your various security requirements. Okay. We'll talk through how the various elements can combine together to give you a robust security model within your application. Okay. And as we mentioned, it's always important as you're defining your security model to consider the balance that each provides, from granularity of access to simplicity of management, and what's going to be the most scalable approach for your application. So now we're going to talk a little bit about ownership types that are available within the system and how those can be leveraged, as well as teams. So there's records within the system can be user-owned or team-owned. Okay? They can be organization-owned, and there's also some special system-created record types that are business unit-owned. Okay? So when you create a new entity within the system, you have the ability to define the ownership type, and you can specify whether it's user or team owned, which is one option, or whether it's organization owned. Okay. Again, user or team owned records can have their security privileges scoped for them at user level, business unit level, parent-child business unit level, or organization level. When you select the type of ownership for an entity as organization owned, there is only one scope for that, and that is organization wide. So when you define that type of entity, if you are going to grant a given user access to that entity via the security role, there is only one scope, and that's organization. So a user would have access to all records of that entity type if they're given permission to that entity. And then business unit owned, there are a few, as I mentioned, out-of-the-box system entities that have a business unit type ownership for them. Okay, that's not one that you are able to define for your custom entities in the system. One other thing to note is that you can't change the ownership type of an entity once it's been created. So if you create an entity with organization type ownership, you can't then switch it to user or team. You would need to delete and recreate the entity if you need to change the ownership type. Okay. And if you're vacillating between the type of ownership you should select, user or team is usually the safer bet. It provides more flexibility and more options if there's any question in your mind as to which approach you should choose. So we'll talk a bit about user ownership and team ownership. So user ownership, the access to a record is implicit in the record ownership itself. So there is an owner defined for the record, okay, and the user that owns the record has access to that record. Okay. There's no need for a secondary table to grant access to that record. So there's not a secondary check that needs to take place, as there are with some of the other models we'll look at, such as sharing, to determine the access to the various records that the user has. Okay. So this helps reduce overall data volumes. It's scalable. Okay. However, the ownership is limited to a single access grant per record, right? One thing to note with user ownership, so the record's business unit is derived from the owner of the record. So in order to determine which business unit a given record falls under from a scoping mechanism, the system looks at the user that owns it or the team that owns its business unit, and that's the business unit to which this record would belong. So team ownership introduces a solution pattern that can simplify some of the challenges that might be associated with situations where users directly own records. So there might be scenarios in your user ownership model where there's many users that need access to a given record, and you might think of granting that via sharing. But another consideration for that objective to achieve it would be team ownership. Okay. So again, team ownership utilizes the benefit of the direct access definition. So the team is defined as the owner of the record. However, it allows for multiple users to be granted to that record via the ownership of the team and their team membership. Okay. Another benefit of teams is that it allows for users of different business units to be members of a given team, which can also enable access to a record that the user wouldn't typically have access to via their directly assigned security roles. Now, as I mentioned earlier, there are two types of teams in the system. There are owner teams and access teams. And these offer different scalability and allow for you to achieve different objectives within the system. Okay. So with an owner team, as implied by the name, they can own records in the system. They must have a security role assigned in order to own records in the system. They can have 0 to many members. Okay. They can also be used as a resource in service scheduling. Okay. With access teams, they can't be assigned security roles and they cannot own records. They're also hidden from a lot of the default views within the system. They can be system managed, which means they are automatically created and removed from the system. And they can also be user created. They cannot be used as a resource for service scheduling, okay? But they can be used to grant access to various records within the system. When you create access teams within the system, there's a couple methods for generating them. One is leveraging the access team templates, and that allows you to create a team template, apply it to a given entity type, and you apply it as a subgrid on the form, and then you can define what the privileges are for the members of that team. So things such as create or update, okay? And then the users are associated to a given record in the system. So we'll look at an example here in a minute. But the team is dynamically created and dissolved when users are added as members to the team. And then when all members are removed from the team is then removed from the system. As we mentioned, each has different benefits and different scenarios for when one would be used over the other. So owner teams are used if it's dictated by policy. So if you need to have a team that owns the records within the system and then all the members of the team have permission to work on the record together. It also allows for some reporting, okay, on progress on various records to which are owned by the team. It's also a good option if the teams and their members are known at the time of system design. Okay. They require some setup. Okay, so there's the management access of it. The team needs to be created. Users need to be added as members of the team as well as the appropriate security roles. Access teams, as we mentioned before, can be dynamically formed and dissolved. Okay? And this is a good option if there's not a clear criteria for team access, or maybe the criteria changes based on the type of record. Okay? So if we don't have a clear pattern of this team works on all records of this type in these conditions and it's variable, then an access team is a good option for you because you can dynamically create it for a specific record. Okay. It's also a good option if the members that will be working on the record require different access rights to the record. So you can have more than one access team for a given record if maybe you have one group that needs write access and one group that only needs read access to it. You can have multiple teams, access teams, that can have permissions to the given record. And some of the other variables to consider when you're trying to determine which team type is appropriate for your situation. So access teams are good when there's a large number of memberships per user, or when the membership is rapidly changing. Okay. It also accommodates that individual record-based access scenario. So there's only maybe a specific subset of records or one-off records to which a given user might need access to. It also supports the owner of the record being able to grant that access to others in the system. So the owner of the record is the one that can determine the members of the access team for that given record. And owner teams, so when there's access, a team that needs access to a significant number of records to the system, within the system, and records can be scoped by a business area, okay, and the team can be defined as a set of members that need access to the given set of records, or if the team needs to be scheduled as a resource in service scheduling. And as an example of a couple of scenarios where an owner team or an access team might be more appropriate. So for an owner team example, perhaps we have a defined group of individuals that processes all cases of a certain type, right? So maybe it's our VIP cases, and we have a team of 5 people that works on these cases collaboratively, and it's a clearly defined team. We can report on the team's progress of their cases, and the members generally all collaborate together, and the cases can be assigned to that team. Now, in access team scenario, there's maybe a defined owner of the case, right? So we have someone that owns it, that's responsible for it. But depending on certain aspects of a case, you might need to involve different individuals. So perhaps there's an investigation taking place and you need an investigator to be assigned to it to assist, right? Or perhaps you need a specialist of a specific kind for this given case in the system. The access team would allow you to specify security principles, so your users, that need to have access to this given case record. Okay? And it might be only for a specific period of time. So maybe it's only during a certain phase of the case that you want to grant access to this given user. So you can easily add that user as a member of the access team for that record, and then remove them when they no longer need access to the record. Okay? And the way access teams are formed is once the first member of an access team is associated to a given record, the team is created. Okay? And then as additional members are added, that particular record is actually shared with those users via the access team. Okay? And then when all members of the team are removed, the team itself is then removed from the system. So it's scalable in that the system will manage it for you as you add and remove the users. So let's talk a little bit about the scalability characteristics of teams. So the performance of the security model is independent of the number of data that the teams are owners of within the system. So it's not going to have an impact from that perspective, okay? Which is quite different from the sharing model that we're going to cover in a little bit more detail in a bit here. Okay? The number of teams in the system also doesn't have a direct impact on performance. Okay? There's been scalability testing, and up to 100,000 teams hasn't shown a significant impact. Okay. Okay. Performance grows linearly with team membership. So, the number of users to which a team is a member will have a linear impact on that performance. The more they have, the more of an impact you would see. Okay. Large team memberships can increase the cache load impact, okay? And also frequent changes in team membership, right? So if you're frequently changing the team that a user is a member of, let's say it's owner teams, and you're consistently modifying those and the users could see on initial loads once their membership is changed, similar with security roles, an impact of that. We've seen target team memberships of up to 1,000 being feasible within the system. Okay. If you're looking at significantly higher than that, that could be a consideration, and you might want to look at a different modeling approach, right? Maybe business units to help resolve some of those requirements that you have for those large team memberships. Some of the implications of ownership in the system. So it does need to check the user and any of their owner teams to which they're a member of with permissions against that, against the owner ID. Okay, so there's that check that needs to occur. So the more team memberships, the more checks that are needed. Okay. As we mentioned before, though, this shows a good linear growth pattern. Right? Okay, the number of teams in the system in and of itself is not a factor. Okay, and as we mentioned earlier, cache is utilized heavily. It works well where there's individual groups of records, okay, client or deal related, that have unique or uncommon access defined. Okay, where there are large common access areas and groups that can be defined, business unit access might be more appropriate. Okay. And we'll talk about business units next here. So business units are used to manage access to large groups of records, okay, for situations where a set of records is defined and the group that needs to access them is clearly defined. Okay. Again, they're hierarchical in nature. And if we look at the image here, right, so we have multiple business units that we've created within the system. Okay, so we have our root business unit, which is labeled as Corp here. And then underneath Corp, we have two business units, EMEA and Asia. And then within each of those, we have subordinate business units. So within Asia, we've got Korea and Vietnam. Within EMEA, we've got Poland and Czech. And then even below that, we've got additional branches. Okay. And as we can see with the figures here, we have one user who is defined as the owner of a record. Okay, and this user is a member of the Poland business unit. So they have direct access to the record in the system. Okay. Now this record has the business unit associated of Poland as well. So that's the inferred business unit based on the owner being a member of Poland. Okay. And then we've got another user below here who has derived business unit access because they are also a member of Poland, of that business unit, and their scoping mechanism is set to business unit level for that record. So the owner's getting access because they're the defined owner, and then this other user is getting access because they're a member of the same business unit and they have business unit level access to that record. Now, if we look at another scenario where we have users that are members of multiple business units, okay? So here we're looking at a subset of the business units we looked at previously. And we have a user that owns a record, okay, in one of our sub-business units over there, business unit C, okay? And so the inferred business unit of that record is going to be business unit C, right? And then we have this other member who's actually a member of the Poland business unit, but that user is also a member of a team that is associated to business unit C. Okay? And that team is granted access via the security role, okay, to this other record within the system that is owned by the user of business unit C. So the user that is a member of the Poland business unit is getting derived business unit access via the team that it's a member of to the record that's owned by business unit C. So again, as we were discussing earlier, a user that's in one business unit can be a member of a team that's owned by another business unit, and that can be a mechanism for granting user access to records across business units, okay, without having to grant them organization level access to a given record type. So implications of business unit access. So it's designed for optimum access to slowly changing structures, okay, and larger group access. So business units are not ideal for scenarios where the users would constantly be changing business unit membership and moving around. So there's a level of maintenance required with that, okay? So if you can break up the organization based on different divisions, that's a good scenario for this, okay? So high volumes of business units or rapidly changing business units can have an impact on performance, right? It's not very scalable if that's your scenario, okay? Access is pre-calculated, right? So that's where if you're constantly changing, it's going to have an impact on the system performance. So some of the benefits, though, is that records are immediately available to the users with business unit access. There's not additional processing that needs to take place. Okay, so if you have slowly changing structures, okay, that you can clearly define, business units are a great scoping mechanism for leveraging users' access to records within the system. So now we're going to talk about the security roles that we're going to be granting to users and teams within the system. Okay? And most of the security features that we're talking about today can all be accessed via settings security within the Dynamics 365 instance. So for a given security role, you have the ability to grant privileges to the various record types or entities within the system. Okay? And there's various access levels that you can grant for those privileges. So first, let's talk about the privileges that you can grant, and then we'll talk about those access levels. Okay? So the first privilege you have the ability to grant is create access. So that's the ability to create a record of a given type within the system or make a new record. Okay? Read access or view access. Okay, so this is required in order to own or view a record in the system of a given type. Write access or edit access to records. Okay, so this is going to determine whether the records you see you're also able to edit in the system and the scope of those that you're able to edit. Delete, which allows you to permanently remove a record from the system. We have append and append to. Okay, so append is required to associate a record with the current record in the system. Okay. And append to, which is required to associate the current record with another record. Okay. Assign, which allows you to give ownership of the record to another user in the system, provided that they have the appropriate security role to own the record. And then we have sharing, which allows for sharing a record with another user in the system. Again, provided that that user with which you want to share the record has the appropriate security role in order to have that record shared with them. Now, for these privileges, you have various access levels that you can grant. Global, which is the equivalent of organization level access. So if I grant a security role, organization level read access to a given record type, let's say it's accounts in the system. If I grant a security role, organization or global read access to accounts, a user that's been assigned that security level or that security role would have access to see all accounts within the system. We have deep, which is also known as parent-child business unit. And this access level grants the user to which it's assigned via the security role access to the immediate business unit of which they're a member, as well as any subordinate or child business units below that. Okay. So if I had read access at the parent-child business unit level to accounts, I would be able to see records that are owned by any user or team within my direct business unit, as well as any business units that are owned by my direct business unit. Okay? And in some scenarios, this could translate to organization if you're a member of the top level business unit in the system. Right. Next, we have local or business unit level access, which is the circle on the right that's half filled. So this gives access to the user's immediate business unit. So using the same example, if I had business unit level read access to accounts in the system, I would only be able to see the accounts that are owned by me or another user or team within my business unit. Okay. And then we have basic or user level access. Okay. And this grants access to the records that I own. So if I had only user level access to read on accounts, I would only be able to see the accounts that I'm the assigned owner of. And finally, we have no access. So if this is the permission level set or the access level set, then you don't have access to that particular privilege. Okay. So if I didn't have read access to accounts, I wouldn't be able to see accounts in the system. Or if I didn't have write access to accounts, I wouldn't be able to edit accounts in the system. Okay. Now these privileges and access levels are all granted to security roles in the system, and then the security roles are the collection of these privileges and are then assigned to the users and teams of the system. So now we're going to talk a bit about sharing within the system. So sharing is the act of directly granting privileges for a particular record to users or teams that need access to it. Okay. And this grant can specify the type of actions and access, such as reading or updating, that are allowed for the record to the user or team with which you are sharing it. Okay. So you can define read access, write access, assign, okay, and as well as delete, and the ability to share the record that you're sharing for that user to share it with another user or team. Okay. A user needs to have read access before they can share. Okay. And users are only allowed to share privileges they currently have. Okay. So if I'm sharing a record and I don't have write access to that record, I can't grant someone else write access to that record. Right? Similarly, the receiving user needs to have minimum permissions to that particular type of entity or record in order to receive the share. So in this example, we're seeing how sharing can be leveraged to a given record, right? So it's usually used to grant explicit access to a set of records. But one thing that you need to keep in mind is that many records are also going to be shared as the act of a cascade share for a given record. So any child records that might be parented by the record that you're sharing, depending on how the relationship is defined, are also typically shared. So for example, if we have an account in the system and that account has many child activities associated to it, right, or contacts associated to it, depending on how the relationship to those records has been configured, those subordinate records will also be cascade shared as part of that action. So I share the account, and the child records are then also shared with that user to which I'm sharing the account record. Okay. So this works well for smaller data volumes, okay? And whether, and it is an exception-based mechanism, right? So your general method of granting access to records in the system should not be leveraging sharing as the model, right? This should be used for fringe or exception-based scenarios when a user needs access to a given record that they wouldn't normally have access to. You also have the ability, in addition to sharing a record with a specific user in the system, to share the record with a team in the system. It's more efficient than specific user level sharing. And when you're going to be sharing with many users a given record or records, evaluating team as a method for sharing the records with those users is something that should be considered. Okay? Now, it could still present a challenge when you're looking at very large data volumes, okay, because you're still sharing the given record and potentially many child records for each record that is shared. Okay? And this all has an impact on the POA table, okay, or the principal object access table, which is what stores all of these shares so that the system knows which records need to be given to a particular user when they access the system or shown to them, and which permissions they should have on those records. Okay. So we'll just quickly look at what the model looks like behind this. So we've got the system user principal, okay, with which the record is going to be shared. So we've got teams, system users, right? And then we've got the principal object access table, which has all the shared records, org-owned records, user records, activity records, that it's housing, right? So as more shares are granted within the system, this table is going to be growing because it's housing all of the information about those shares. Okay, so this is what's queried when a user is accessing the system to determine which records or objects the given user has access to. Okay. Just reiterating what we've mentioned. So when these records are shared with many users and many teams, and it's many records being shared, this table can significantly grow, okay? And that cascading can have a significant impact on this. So while it can be granular in nature, it can be data intensive depending on the number of records with which a user or team is going to be shared within the system. So you can see the schema on the right here where we have the system user, we have the system user principal, and then the principal object access table, right? So the access checks are taking the user, joining to the user principal and the principal object access table in order to determine the data set that's going to be presented back to the user. So some of the implications, which we've covered on sharing here, okay, so it works well as an exception mechanism, right? So this shouldn't be the general rule for how data access is granted. Okay? When you're using it to model large-scale solutions and you're looking at larger data volumes, okay, this can have a performance impact. Okay? There's administrative overhead for sharing as well. So when you grant a share to a record, when you're doing a manual share within the system to a given user or team, in order to remove that access, you need to go in and manually remove the access or the sharing from the user or team. Okay, and that's done from within the context of the given record and the share option, right? So when you're looking at a more common usage pattern, there's better mechanisms for granting access to records, right? Whether it's team ownership or whether it's business unit access, there's various options that should address when you're looking at your common usage patterns for large quantities of data. Okay, so the next area that we're going to look at is security hierarchies. Okay. So security hierarchies allow for automatically rolling up privileges or access to records to managers within the system. So the management levels inherit privileges through multiple levels from their direct reports. So, for example, the direct manager of a given user would have read, okay, and interact or update access to records, whereas a second level manager would have read-only access to the record set, right? There's no need for customization to automate this. So if we're looking at the example in the figure here, we have a team of sales people that are, owning a set of records within the system, right? And the managers of the sales team have read and write access to those records. Whereas the director level, which is the manager of the manager, okay, has read access to those records. Okay. And one thing to be mindful of, again, in this scenario is that you can be granting access to many records that you might not realize via this model, right? So while a given manager might only have access to a subset of records, that director or that skip level is going to have access to all of the records for their directs and their directs, right? And there's two types of hierarchies that are available. Okay? There's manager hierarchy and there's position-based hierarchy. Okay? So the manager hierarchy leverages the system user recursive manager hierarchy. So on a user record within Dynamics 365, there is a relationship back to user. Okay, so that's the recursive system user relationship to specify the manager of that given user. So that's a lookup to your user table that allows you to specify the manager for this user. Okay. And it's a standard configuration, which maybe you already have defined within your organization. So you can just configure that within Dynamics 365 as your manager hierarchy. Now, position-based hierarchy is similar to the manager hierarchy. However, it allows for more than one person to be linked to each level. So in the manager hierarchy, a user can only have one manager specified. Okay. With the position-based hierarchy, you can assign multiple users to a given position, right? So if for scenarios where you might have multiple managers supporting a pool of resources, so maybe you have a call center or a help desk where there's multiple managers that would be managing the team, this might be a better fit. When granting permissions, you're going to have a combination of permissions from all of the people that are at the reporting or lower levels of the hierarchy. You might have scenarios where one manager might own data within the system, but other managers at the same level wouldn't necessarily have access to that manager's data, right? It's going to be the subordinate. Okay. There's only a single position hierarchy available right now, so you can only set up one position hierarchy for your organization. Okay. You can't have multiple, okay? And a person can only be assigned to one position. So I can't have multiple positions assigned to me within the system. Now, when we're looking at leveraging the security hierarchies, you do want to be mindful of the number of levels and try to limit those to 4 or less, okay, or 50 reports. At some point when you're looking at these larger numbers, it might be more performant to look at a business unit structure as opposed to leveraging that security hierarchies. Okay. And just to give a quick example of this, as you aggregate the levels, as we mentioned earlier, the volume of data can grow significantly, right? So if we're looking at, even with 3 levels, right, you might have upwards of 1,000 direct reports or 1,000 indirect reports and greater than 5 million records, right? So if we look at this scenario here that's depicted on the right there, we might have a CEO that's managing 10 directors, right, with over 1,000 direct and indirect reports, and we're looking at more than 5 million records. Okay. And then dipping down, right, we have the director, which might have 500,000, and then the manager with 50,000, all rolling up to that top level of millions of records. Okay. So this can have the similar implications that you'd see with a standard sharing model when you're looking at large data volumes and levels that are greater than 4 or 50 direct reports. Now, one of the final areas that we were going to cover today is field level security. So field level security is used to restrict access to specific high business impact fields for a given entity. Okay? And you can restrict the access to granted to specific users or teams. Okay? And like the record-based security, it applies after privileges have taken effect, right? So if a user doesn't have access to a particular entity, okay, then this doesn't apply, right? So if I don't have access to accounts, but I have a profile that grants me access to a field on accounts, that security role permission is going to take effect before the field level security profile is applied. Okay? And this would enable locking down access to specific fields. So perhaps I am granted access to read all account records in the system, but I don't have access to view the account number field for accounts. Okay, so field level security can enable this scenario, or perhaps I'm able to view it, but I'm not able to edit it. So in addition to the security roles, the field level security profile is going to determine whether the user has access to secured fields within the system and which secured fields they have access to. So the security profile determines the permissions to the secured fields, okay, and the users and teams that are granted access to the profile in those secured fields. Okay. And a security profile is configured to grant read, create, or update access to a secured field. Okay, so read's going to let the user view the field. Create would allow the user to enter data into the field on create of the record, and update allows for updating the field after the record has been created in the system. And you can combine these permissions, so a given profile might have access to all 3 of these permissions for a given field, or you might have multiple profiles that grant these permissions. Perhaps one profile grants read access to it, and then there's another profile of users that not only have read access, but also have update access, right, or create access. So as we discussed today, it's a combination of all of these access control mechanisms that should be leveraged to build out a complete, robust security model for your application. Okay? And all of these can work together to ensure that your given users are granted the appropriate permissions within the system. Okay, and of course being mindful of granularity of access that the given user might need, simplicity of implementing and maintaining, as well as the scalability of the given approach. And since we have a bit of time here, I'll take a brief pause, and if there's any questions, feel free to pop those in the chat window, and we'll transition and look at some of these configurations for access control in a live system.
All right, Katie, no questions at this time?
Okay. So my screen should start to share here.
There it goes.
Okay, perfect. All right, so as we mentioned during the presentation, most of the configurations that we discussed are accessed via the settings and security within Dynamics 365. So on your main navigation at the top, if you click on where you might land on sales or service, depending on your role, you might default to settings in the system. If you click on the navigation to the right, okay, the little drop-down caret there, you'll see the different areas within the application. And if you choose the settings area, you'll then see an option for security, okay, under the system sub-area. And then once we select security, you'll see the various options for configuration. Right? So the users area, this is where all of your users are synchronizing from Office 365 and Azure Active Directory. So if you attended our tenant admin and operations session, we walk through how users are assigned licenses and associated to security groups, which then drives their synchronization to your various Dynamics 365 instances. Okay? So in here, I can see my list of enabled users. You also have the ability to toggle to see disabled users. So those would be users that have had their licensing revoked or that were just loaded for historical purposes. And this is where you can assign your users their security roles. Okay. So from this list, I have the ability to select a single user, and I can actually promote them to a system administrator from this view, one at a time. Okay. I can also select one or more users and manage security roles for those users, okay, by selecting the manage roles. And this is going to give me the list of the available roles that I can assign. Okay. I can assign multiple at a given time. Okay. I also have the ability to look at a particular user and see which roles they've been assigned. So let's look at Allie. So here we can see Allie's profile information. Okay. On the right side, we can see the teams that she's been assigned to, so the teams of which she's a member. We can also see the business unit that she's been assigned to in the system. Okay. And you have the ability to change the business unit here. So if you needed to move Allie to a different business unit within the system, you can modify the business unit here. Okay. This is also an area where you can define the manager or the position. And depending on if you have the hierarchy security enabled and whether it's position or manager based, the manager and position that are specified here would then be used to determine Allie and Allie's manager and Skip manager's access to records within the system. Yeah, and you've also got some other associated information here, things like the mailbox that's associated to Allie and her access mode. Now, up at the top, we have the ability to view the roles to which Allie has been associated, and you could do that a couple of ways. If I click on Manage Roles, it's going to pop open that dialog again, and any roles that Allie has been assigned, you will see here as being checked or selected. Okay. So right now, she's only been assigned the customer service representative role. I can also view the list of roles if I go to the associated record lists. So just to the right, if I click on the drop down to the right of Allie's name, I can navigate to roles and see the list of security roles that have been associated from this view. Okay. You can also access the Manage Roles option here, and you also have the ability to remove roles. Okay. You'll notice when I clicked on here, I also have access to view some other information associated to Allie, like the field level security profiles that have been associated to her. So if I click on field security profiles, we'll see if Allie has any associated. And she happens to have the case specialist field security profile associated to her user. We can drill into the field security profile from here to view the permissions, or we can access it from the main security panel. So let's go ahead and do that. We'll toggle back here to security. And since we were talking about field security profiles, we'll navigate that next. So we'll just click on field security profiles here. Okay, and by default, one will be added to the system that's called the System Administrator Field Level Security Profile, to which system administrators will be associated by default, which grants them access. Okay. I've also created a custom Case Specialist Field Security Profile. So we'll go ahead and take a look at this one. So when you create a new security profile, you give it a name and you can give it a more detailed description. On the left side is where we're going to define the permissions that this particular field security profile will have to the secured fields. So if we click on the left here to field permissions, you'll see a list of all the fields in the system that have had field level security enabled on them. Okay, so there's a toggle on a field where you can specify that the field should be enabled for field level security. And once you toggle that there and turn it on, okay, when you publish that change out, by default, users will not have access to that field until they've been granted a profile that gives them some level of access. So it's important to be mindful of that. If you're customizing, if you're kind of playing around with it and then you enable field level security on a field, users, the general user population, will not have access to that field until you go in, define a profile that grants some level of access to it and assign it to users or teams within the system. Okay. So for this particular profile, the case specialist, you can see we've got a few different types of fields in here. Okay, we've got some that are coming off the account entity. So a number of open deals or opportunities in the system, the value of open revenue. Okay. And then we've got a couple other fields here. We've got an option set that's on the case record for origin, so where did the case come in from, and that's had field level security enabled on it. And then we've got some others that have been enabled for our portal solution, so some of the login enabled and user enabled fields, username fields for that, right? So this profile is only granting access, read access to the origin field on case. So you'll see read is set to yes on here, and every other permission is set to no. Okay, so if a user is assigned this field security profile, the only permission that this specific one is going to give is read access to origin. Okay. You can modify, right? So if I drill into this particular field within the profile, you have the ability to define the permissions. So right now, we already have read set to yes. If I wanted to also allow users or teams assigned to this profile to update this field, I can change the value for update to yes. Okay. And then we also have create in here, right? So again, this means if the user is creating a new case, are they allowed to input data into the origin code on create of the case? I think that makes sense, right, for this profile. Since they're creating the case, they should be able to define where the case came from. So I'll click OK. All right, and if I wanted to modify access to other fields within here, I have the ability to do that, right? Okay. You also have the ability to define the teams and users that are associated to this profile. So you can do that either from within the profile itself, or as you saw when we were on the user record, I can associate the user to the profile as well from that method. Okay. And if I click on users here, I should see Allie in here as a user, and she happens to be the only user that has this profile. But if I wanted to add additional users, I can click add, and I can add multiple users to this profile. And one of the things that you'll notice in here, I'm just going to switch over to Allie's profile quickly. So I have two windows popped up here, and here you'll see I'm logged in as Allie. Okay, so we'll just navigate over to cases. Okay. Let's go ahead and open one of the cases within the system. Okay, now you'll notice for origin, right? So that's the field that we were just looking at, the field security profile, right? So you'll notice it's got the key next to it. So this is indicating that it's a secured field. Now, this record is already created and exists in the system. And my security profile for Allie said that Allie's able to enter it on create, and she's able to read the field, but she's not able to update it. So you'll notice that the field is locked down for Allie. I can't modify this field with this given profile. However, if I create a new case, it should allow me to populate it on create. So you'll notice on create that it's enabled. So I can specify this. Okay. Hopefully I've populated the minimum there. That should save the record for me. Okay. And then the field will go to disabled because it's now an existing case and I'm not allowed to update. Okay. Pop this back open. So if we navigate back to my admin profile, so we'll go back to this window, and you can see in here I'm logged in as a system administrator. And we'll just jump back up to the main security screen here. So some of the other things that you can enable in here, so if we look at our security roles, so by default, you'll have a set of system roles that are created by default when you provision a new instance. Okay, and depending on the solutions that you install, you might have some additional roles that are provisioned by default. So for example, if you provision our field service solution or voice of the customer, there's additional roles that will be provisioned as part of that. Okay, so you might see a different number of roles by default when you spin up an instance, depending on that. Okay. Now, for a given security role, you can go in and modify the permissions for that role, okay, all but system administrator. So we don't allow you to modify the system administrator role. That role has access to everything, but you can modify some of the other system roles in the system. So if I go into the customer service representative role, for example, okay, you have the ability to go in and modify the various permissions for the role. You also have the ability to copy this role to create a new role. So if you're defining your security model and there's new roles that you want to create as part of that, okay, we recommend that you choose one of the system roles that is most closely aligned with the permissions that you intend to grant and copy that role and then modify that, okay, and scale back or add additional permissions to it. And that's because there are a lot of permissions that are required just to access the system, right? There's a lot of permissions that if you're starting from scratch, can take quite a bit of work to replicate and set up. So if you start from something that's closely aligned and then scale back or add on to it, that tends to be the best approach for adding new roles to the system. Okay? And you'll notice when you look at a given security role, the different entities and actions are broken up into the different areas to which they correspond for the most part. Okay, so you've got your core records tab. That has a lot of the core entities that apply across the different modules or areas of the system. Okay, so we have things like accounts, connections, contacts, right? And then we also have some other permissions for things such as the ability to create dashboards, a user-specific dashboard or chart in the system. And you have the ability to modify the given permissions for an entity by clicking on the circle for the corresponding privilege, right? So I can do one-off if I just want to do create here, right? I can also go across the rows or down the columns. So if I wanted to incrementally update permissions for account, I can click on the name account here and it will update all of the corresponding privileges for that row. Okay. Likewise, I can also do that for the privilege down the column. So if I click on create here, it's going to slowly increment permissions up through the column and then clear them. Now there are some permissions that don't allow for all the different scoping levels. So as we discussed earlier, if the ownership of a given entity is organization level, you can't define a user's access to it as user level or business unit level. It's all or nothing. It's organization or it's no access. Okay. Similarly with some of the user entity settings down here that you'll see for user chart, user dashboard, and UI, right? So for these, it's either user level or nothing. I can't grant an organization level because it doesn't apply to this type of permission. Okay. Now, in addition to the privileges that you can set for all of the entities, you'll also see some miscellaneous or ad hoc permissions or actions that you can grant access to at the bottom of the tabs. Okay, so for core records, you'll see miscellaneous permission or privileges include things like the ability to add custom reports, to bulk delete records, or delete audit partitions, right? So you can enable, and again, these are similar to those organization level settings. Most of these will be all or nothing, right? So I can either bulk delete in the system or I can't. And then the rest of my privileges are going to drive which types of records I'm able to bulk delete, right? So if I don't have permission to accounts in the system, giving me bulk delete permission is not going to allow me to bulk delete accounts because I have no access to accounts. Right? So it's going to give me permission to perform bulk deletes on records to which I have access. Okay. If we look at some of the other tabs here, so we have marketing, which is things like campaigns and marketing list management. We have the sales section, which includes things like invoices, orders, quotes, territory, define service, which includes things like case management. So we have cases that can be accessed from here, knowledge management access, whether the user has the ability to publish and approve articles in the system. Business management, so whether the given user has the ability to create new positions in the system or business units. Okay? And again, we have some miscellaneous privileges as well as some privacy related privileges that are on the business management tab here. Right? So whether they're able to access or use document generation, whether they're allowed to use the mobile application, so Dynamics 365 for phones, which is driven based off security role. If you happen to be using the Outlook add-in or Outlook client, whether you have the ability to go offline with that, okay, the ability to print, and then some other privileges below here. So the ability to act on behalf of another user, okay, or send email as another user within the system. And then we have a couple of the other areas here. So service management, which allows for managing things like SLAs or entitlements in the system. Okay. Customization permissions within the system. So can you add an attribute? Can you modify a form? Okay. These are generally left at read access with the exception of some things like processes or workflow. Generally, customization is left to the customization role or the system administrator role, but you do have the ability to modify some of that for a given role within the system. You also have some entities that are hidden off the various maps, as well as permissions for things like business process flows. Okay, and which business process flows the given role has access to. So this can be defined here, and then you also have the ability to associate it at other levels. Okay, and then custom entities. So any custom entities that you add to the system through the customization option or via importing a solution, okay, will show up on the Custom Entities tab. By default, when you add a new entity to the system, the existing security roles do not automatically get access to that, with the exception of system administrator, right? But your regular security roles, like the customer service representative or any custom roles that you've added or case manager or whatever it might be, the system will not automatically grant any sort of permissions to those entities by default. So be mindful that when you add a new entity, if you haven't gone in and modified the appropriate security roles, users aren't going to have access to it. Okay, so you'll need to go in and for the given entities, grant access. Okay. And again, you have the ability to do that across for an entity or down the column for a privilege, okay, or just one off, okay? And you have a key down here to remind you of what the various options indicate, right? Your user level, your business unit level, parent, child, and organization. And again, if you have an entity type or an entity that ownership has been defined as organization level, you're not going to be able to define all of these scoping levels. It'll either be none or organization. At the top here, you have the ability to copy the role. You can also do that from the main security role list. So if I wanted to create a copy of this role to create another custom role in the system, okay, it'll define the role that I'm copying for me. I can give the new role a name. I also can tell it to pop open this new role so I can continue modifying it. Okay, so it'll then create a copy of this role, pop open a new role for me to be able to modify, and then that role will be available to assign to users. When you create a security role within a given business unit, that security role will cascade down to any of the child business units as well. Okay? So if I create this at my root level of KD Have Demo, which is my root business unit level within this instance, I'm then going to see the security role available in all of the child business units below this. I can only modify it within the business unit to which it was created or associated. So if I want to modify it, I have to modify it within the context of my KD Have Demo business unit. Okay. If I create a security role within a child business unit specifically, that's not going to roll up to my parent business unit, so I will only see it within that child and any subordinate business units of that child. Let's save and close this. We'll close this out. I'm not gonna save my changes to my CSR because I don't think they were appropriate changes. So we'll leave those there. Okay, and you'll notice for security roles, you can navigate between business units if you have multiple business units in your given instance to see the various security roles that are available for each of those instances. Okay. Let's navigate back to security here. We'll look at a couple other things. So on the right here, we have teams. Okay? And this is where you can add teams to the system. And you have your different views here. So I can look at my local business unit teams. I can look at all teams within the system. Okay, and you'll see I have a few different teams in here. So I've created a VIP cases team. So you'll see within here, when I pop open the team itself, see the team name, VIP cases, the business unit to which this team is associated, as well as the administrator for the team, and also the type of team, whether it's an owner team or an access team. And I have the ability to convert this to an access team as well. Okay. On the right side, you'll see any users that are a member of this team. Okay. Let's go ahead and add a user to this team. See if I can find Allie in there and associate Allie. So now Allie is a member of the VIP cases team. And you'll notice that while she's a member of the KD Have Demo business unit, she can be a member of the VIP cases team, okay, which is associated to the check business unit. And this is going to drive the access that Allie has within the system. And if we look at the security roles, we can look at the security roles that this team has been assigned. Again, in order for a team to own records in the system, they have to have a security role that grants access to the records that they're going to own. Okay, so if you create a team, you add members, but you forget to assign a security role to that team, and you go in and try to assign records to it, you're going to get a security error that the team doesn't have permission to own those records. Okay, so you'll just need to go in and assign appropriate security role. So in this case, the VIP cases team is assigned the customer service representative security role. Now if we look over here, where we have, this should be Allie's user logged in. So you'll see if I toggle my view, by default, I'm seeing a list of the cases to which I'm assigned in the system. If I toggle to all active cases, okay, you'll see I have my cases. I can see a lot of cases within the system, but I also have the cases that are owned by the VIP case team. And you can create views within the system that will drive the user to be able to see their cases or cases that are owned by teams of which they're a member. Okay. And as this is owned by the VIP cases team, I have the ability to work on this case as well. I have edit permissions on the given case record, which is granted via the combination of the security role that's assigned to the team itself, as well as my security role that's assigned directly to Allie. Okay, so one thing that's important to note when you're creating a security model is we'll frequently be asked if you can just manage all user access via Teams and just grant security roles to teams and have the user inherit permissions to the system via teams that they're a member of. That's not an appropriate model. So users need to have some level of directly assigned security role to even access the system. Okay, and then the security roles that are assigned to the team grant permissions on the records that the team owns to members of the team. Okay, so you can't just make membership of teams and assigning security roles to teams your end-all be-all security model. The user needs to have some level of security role assigned to them in order to perform specific actions in the system. Okay. So quickly we'll take a look at hierarchy security. Okay. So you have the ability when you navigate into hierarchy security to enable hierarchy modeling. So this will not be enabled by default. So you have to check this off in order to enable it in the system. And then you need to select the model that you're going to use. So there's the manager hierarchy, which again leverages that manager lookup on the user record. Okay. Or there's the custom position hierarchy, okay, which leverages that position model. If you click configure, so if we're looking at the manager type hierarchy, this is going to pop open the list of users, okay, so that you can define managers for users. And you'll notice for users for which a manager has been set up, okay, you'll see the hierarchy here. Okay, so that indicates that there's a hierarchy that's been set up for these specific users. If we click on that, it'll take us to the hierarchy display. So we can see Krista is David's manager. Okay. Now, if we were to switch to position-based hierarchy and click on configure, this is where you can define the positions in the system. By default, you won't see any. Okay, you'll need to create your position hierarchy. So I've created a sales representative position, and then I've created a sales manager and a sales director. Okay, and the sales representative is parented by the sales manager. We'll just drill into this. So you can see the definition here. And you have the ability to modify this, right? So I have my sales rep that's parented by my sales manager. At the moment, I don't have any users that are associated to the sales representative role. Okay, so if you remember when we were looking at the user record, we had the ability to define a manager and a position. Okay, so that's what this is looking at, to show the users that are in a given position. Okay, I can add a user to a position. So now I've added Allie to the sales representative position, and you'll see it's showing her position here. And if I drill into her user record, that will be reflected as well. Okay. So if we look back here, okay, we can add a new position. It'll pop open that same dialog. I can give it a name. And then I can define a parent position if applicable. We'll just call it CEO. Okay, I'm not going to define a parent position for it. I'm going to save and close that. But maybe I want the CEO to parent the sales director. And you'll notice right now the CEO doesn't have a relationship to any other positions in the system, so that hierarchy isn't displayed there. Okay, but if I link the CEO to the sales director, there will then be that relationship in place, and we'll see that icon displayed. Okay, so now you see that's been updated because now the CEO has a link to the sales director. Okay, so a couple of other things that we talked about, sharing, for example. So let's go ahead and we'll look at a few records in the system. Sorry, I had changed my hierarchy security, so it was prompting me to save my changes there. Okay, so for a given record, there's a few means for sharing records. You can do it within a given view within the system. So if you're leveraging advanced find, you have the ability to do it through that method. You can also do one-off sharing from within the context of a specific record. Okay, so if I had this case and perhaps I wanted to share the case with another user or team in the system, depending on your resolution, this typically tends to be displayed under the ellipses as additional options. Okay. So if we click on that ellipses for the additional menu options, we can click on share. Okay, and it's going to pull up any other users or teams with which I've shared this. I haven't shared this record yet. So I can click on add user or team, and I can choose a specific user, or I can choose a team with which I want to share it. We'll go with Allie again here. And we could do multiple, so maybe I want to do Allie and Amy. Okay, so when I add them, I can then define the permissions that they should have on this record. So am I just giving them the default of read access, or do I also want to allow them to edit this record? Okay, or share it with someone else. And I could do different permissions for the different principals that have been listed here. Okay. And then I can click share, and then they will see this record in their list of cases, okay, if they weren't already seeing it, right, which in theory, they wouldn't have access to it, which is why you're sharing it, so they wouldn't see it, and then once you share it, they will see it in their list. Okay. Now if I go back in here to share, again, I'll see who I've shared the record with, and I can also remove permission. Okay, so maybe I want to take away write access, or I want to remove permission altogether, right? modify that. Now keep in mind with the cascade, that shared this case, and if I had any related activities to the case, those would also be shared as well. And we'll navigate back here. A couple other quick things since we have a few more minutes. So access team templates are managed through this option here. Okay. We'll see by default, there will be a couple of system templates that have been generated, okay, with associated permissions. So if we look at this team template, okay, so for the case team template that's been created, this gives members that are associated to this team on a given case record, okay, the following permissions. So they can append to the case, and they can view it and edit it, okay? They can't reassign it, they're not allowed to share it out, and they can't delete it from the system, okay? If we look at the opportunity one, we'll see that this is, again, tied to the opportunity entity, okay? And right now, we only have the access team templates enabled for two entities, case and opportunity in the system. This is defined at the entity level. And as you add more entities or enable them for access teams, they will show up for selection when you're creating a team template, okay? This is the out-of-the-box sales team template. Okay, it gives append to and read and write access for the sales team members that are associated to a given opportunity. Okay. And these are set up, the team templates are associated to a given record on the form. So I'm just going to navigate up here to settings and customization. We'll just quickly look at how you can enable this. Okay, so on the left side where we have our entities, we'll go ahead and look at the case entity here. Okay, and we'll give that a second to load. And so what we're going to do is we're going to add a subgrid on the case form, okay, and we will define the team template for that. Okay, so well, first, actually, let's look at the case overall. I wanted to show you quickly that definition to enable it. Okay, so you'll notice there's an option here for access teams. Okay, so you can turn this on for existing entities, or when you create a new entity, you can enable it as well. Okay, so once this is enabled here and published, then that entity will be available to create a template for. Let's go ahead and open the main case form here. And we'll look at this. So here, I actually have it enabled on the case form on the right side here. You see where you have this case team, and we'll just look at the properties for this subgrid. So when you add it to the form, okay, when you're doing it as a team template as opposed to just a regular subgrid of associated records, The way that you enable this is you're going to flip the records to all record types, and you're going to choose entity user for your entity. Okay, and then the default view will be associated record team members. Okay, and then when you choose this, it's going to provide the list of team templates that you've created for cases. Okay, in our scenario, we only have one team template that we've created for the case entity. Okay, so that's what's available for selection. And then when we publish this out, which we've already done, so we'll take a look at that, but once you publish it out, if you're setting it up for the first time, then you will be able to associate users as part of the case team, and then it's going to grant them the privileges that the case team allows. In this case, they can update the case, and they can associate records to the case and associate the case to other records in the system, right? So if we go ahead and take a look back here, we'll just navigate over to Service and Cases. Again, we'll open one of our cases in here. And again, this is form specific that you're adding this subgrid to. So make sure you're adding it. If you have multiple forms, you're adding it to all versions of the forms if that's relevant. Okay. Or if you add it and you're not seeing it in the system, make sure that you're on the form to which you've added it. And one thing to keep in mind, so when you looked at the form that I was customizing, you probably didn't see recent cases as a subgrid or entitlements, and that's because that's coming off the related account card. So that's showing the related entity view for account that's associated to the case on here and some information to that account. But if we scroll down a bit, you'll see case team. So this is the subgrid that we added. Right? And there's no users in here. So right now, there is not an actual access team in the system for this specific case. If you remember how access teams work, the moment the first member is added to the given record, that's when the team gets created and the record gets shared out. And then once the last team member is removed, then that team is also removed from the system. So the moment I add someone to this case, let's add Allie again. You have to make sure she has appropriate permission. So now Allie has been added as a member of the team for this case. Okay, so that access team now exists in the system. So now Allie would have permissions to this case to be able to edit it, view it, and associate records to it. And it's specific to this case only, right? So I'm not granting Allie permissions to a broad number of cases here. This is in the context of this specific case. All other permissions that she has for other cases in the system are going to remain as is. Okay, so with that, we're nearing the end of our time here. So I'll leave it open if there's any questions since we've gone through the demonstration now.
So Katie, while we're waiting for those last couple of questions to come in, folks, I'd like to call your attention to the survey link that I posted in the messages window. Your feedback is very valuable to us. We'd appreciate you taking a moment. Click the link, enter your email, you'll be taken into the survey. Our voting scale is on a scale of 1 to 5, with 5 being the best score possible. Then be sure to click on the Submit button at the bottom to ensure that your feedback has been received. And with that, Katie, I don't see any questions. Oh, looks like we just got one in. Let's see, it's from Krishna, and I'm putting it here into the IM window for you. There you go.
Okay, perfect. And while we're reading this, just to as a follow-up with all of the topics that we've covered today, your fast track engineer is there to support you with this as well. So if you have questions on best practices, on how to implement a specific concept that we discussed today or how it might be relevant for your requirements, please follow up with your fast track engineer. We're here to support you in your deployments and also assist you with your deploying the most scalable solution for your organizations. Yeah, so Krishna had a question on the principal object access table. So let me flip over to that slide. And again, your fast track engineer can help with some of these scenarios. So if you're seeing some performance degradation and you suspect it might be related to that, or if you're leveraging sharing as a main function for your security within the system, your fast track engineer can help with doing some monitoring and sizing of your POA table and help with making some recommendations for how you might make that, how you could get that under control a bit. So let's just flip back over to how that works. But the main thing that you want to keep in mind when you're leveraging sharing as a common access model here, sorry, I'm trying to get to the right slide here, is to use that as an exception-based scenario, right? So sharing should not be the common method for which you're granting access to all various records in the system. Okay, so you want to make sure, and here's the table here, that that's really exception-based. So there's some fringe scenarios where users need to have access to records, and sometimes you can't get around it, right? So sharing's there, and it has a purpose, and it should just not be your primary security model, because if your method for granting access to records in the system is primarily via sharing. So maybe the user has user level access to a given record type, okay, but they are granted access to hundreds of other records in the system via sharing, and maybe you've automated it. Maybe you've created a custom plugin or a custom code that's automatically sharing records with users, right? The implications of that are this table growing broadly. And so the things that you want to be mindful of is ensuring that that's not your primary security model, and that you are verifying the types of records that are going to be cascade shared as well, and the average numbers of those records, right? So if you're typically sharing cases, and cases typically have a significant number of activities associated to them for your organization, knowing that, well, not only am I sharing one case, I'm also sharing 30 activity records associated to that case, or some other type of child record that you might have created, or custom entity that might be related to that master record that you're sharing. So also looking at the configurable cascade option for those relationships that you're creating within the system. You have the ability to configure on a share of the parent whether that subordinate relationship will also share out those child records. Okay, for the system ones, you can't really modify that for the most part, but for any custom relationships you create, you also have the ability to flag that relationship or configure that relationship as a configurable cascading relationship, which allows you to drive the behaviors for things like sharing. So maybe it's not necessary when you share the master record for all the child records to be shared. Maybe it is, but maybe it isn't. So considering that as well when you're creating relationships and ensuring that you're configuring those as appropriate with your sharing model in mind. Okay, and also keep in mind some of these other components that we discussed also leverage sharing behind the scenes. However, it also has a method for cleaning up the sharing as well. So things like access teams that we just reviewed. So that does leverage sharing in the background. However, it will dynamically create the teams so that they're not just sitting there with users and granting access. It's created on demand, if you will. And then when the users are removed for it, the system is programmatically cleaning it up. Okay? When you're relying on manual sharing, or if you've automated it via custom code, the mechanism for cleanup is, the user that's sharing it, right, needs to be cognizant of that, and when the team or users that they've shared with no longer needs access to the records, removing that share access. So that's an area where, that tends to contribute to this growth, because typically when users share records, they might not necessarily be going back into the system and removing the access when the person with which they've shared it no longer needs it, right? It's just still sitting out there as a share that happened. Okay, there's also other shares that happen when records are reassigned, and some of that behavior you can control. So when records are reassigned to new owners, there's a behavior where that record can be shared back with the prior owner. So that's also something to be mindful of as well, that can impact the growth of this table.
All right, just got another one coming through now.
Yep. So for user provisioning, it depends on the type of, so the question was being able to programmatically add and update users to the system or deactivate users. Okay, so there's a couple methods for doing that. You can leverage PowerShell, for example, and those users, I'm assuming you're talking about users that will actually be logging in and accessing the system. Okay, so that's actually done through Office 365. And Azure Active Directory, as we mentioned before. So there's a set of PowerShell commandlets that you can leverage to programmatically create users. You can also synchronize with your on-prem Active Directory. So it kind of depends on what your current setup is. We do have a session that digs into a bit more detail, but you can programmatically add users to Active Directory, and that has those users then show up within Office 365. They synchronize over, and then you can assign licenses to them within the Office 365 console, which then synchronizes them down to your Dynamics instances. Okay. And you also have the ability to assign security roles as well. You can do that programmatically as opposed to manually. You can also do that via PowerShell programmatically. We have a set of commandlets that enable you to do that. And we can send you a bit more info on that as well. And your fast track engineer can also go into detail on the options there. And with that, since we're at time, we'll go ahead and wrap this. I thank you all for attending today. Please give us your feedback. We do review it and incorporate it into future sessions. And hope you have a great rest of your day. And Debbie, I will hand it over to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Katie. So ladies and gentlemen, that does conclude today's Partner Infopedia web conference. The recording can be found at the same registration site within 24 hours. Again, I'd like to extend a big thank you to our presenter, Katie, and thank you, audience, for logging in and joining us today.